My name is Robinson Crusoe, and I was born in the city of York in the year 1632. My father was a merchant who had come from Germany many years before, and he worked hard to give our family a comfortable life. He wanted me to study law and live peacefully, perhaps becoming a successful businessman like himself. But from my earliest days, all I could think about was the sea. The ocean called to me in my dreams. I imagined tall ships with white sails cutting through blue waters, visiting distant lands filled with strange people and mysterious treasures. My father would sit me down and speak seriously about the dangers of a sailor's life. He told me that men who go to sea face terrible storms, pirates, disease, and often die far from home without their families nearby. He said the middle station of life was best, where a man has enough to be comfortable, but not so much that others envy him. But young men rarely listen to wise advice, especially when adventure burns in their hearts. When I was 19 years old, I met a friend whose father commanded a ship bound for London. My friend invited me to sail with them, promising it would be a wonderful voyage. I did not tell my father. I did not ask permission. One September morning, I simply left home and went aboard the ship. The moment we left the harbor, I felt excitement racing through my body. The wind filled the sails, and the coast of England grew smaller behind us. For a few hours, I thought I had made the right choice. Then the weather changed. Dark clouds rolled across the sky like angry fists. The wind began to howl, and waves as tall as houses crashed against our ship. I had never been so terrified in my entire life. The ship rocked violently from side to side. Water poured across the deck, and sailors shouted orders I could barely hear over the screaming wind. I clung to a rope, soaking wet and sick to my stomach, certain that I would die. I prayed desperately, promising God that if He saved me, I would go straight home and never go to sea again. I would obey my father and live the quiet life he wanted for me. After several terrible hours, the storm finally passed. The sea grew calm again, and the sun appeared. As the fear left my body, my promises to God began to fade too. My friend laughed about the storm, calling it a small adventure. The other sailors made jokes and drank wine to celebrate surviving. Slowly, I convinced myself that the storm had not been so bad after all. Perhaps sailing was not as dangerous as my father claimed. We reached London safely, and I spent time in that great city, amazed by its size and noise and crowds. My friend's father tried to convince me to return home, but I would not listen. Instead, I made plans for another voyage, this time to the coast of Africa to trade for gold and ivory. I used some money my father had once given me to purchase goods for trading. That voyage went well. We traded successfully with people along the African coast, and I returned with enough profit to feel proud of myself. I thought I was becoming a real sailor and merchant. But my pride would soon lead to disaster. I decided to make another voyage to Africa. This time, our ship had barely left the English coast when Turkish pirates attacked us. They were fierce fighters with curved swords and loud voices. Our sailors tried to defend the ship, but we were outnumbered and outmatched. The pirates killed some of our men and took the rest of us as prisoners. I became a slave in the city of Salé on the coast of Morocco. The pirate captain who had captured me made me work in his house and tend his gardens. For 2 long years, I lived as his property, dreaming constantly of escape. I learned to speak a little Arabic and to obey quickly to avoid beatings. Every night, I looked at the sea and remembered my father's warnings. How right he had been, and how foolish I had been not to listen. My master sometimes took me fishing in a small boat along the coast. One day he gave orders to prepare the boat with extra supplies because some of his friends wanted to go fishing the next day. But his friends never came. Seeing my chance, I convinced a young boy named Yuri, who was also a slave, to escape with me. We took the boat and sailed away as fast as we could. For days we traveled south along the African coast, staying close to land but far enough away to be seen. We caught fish to eat and found fresh water in small streams. I knew that we needed to sail far from Salih before we would be truly safe. Yuri was brave and helpful, and I was grateful not to be alone. After many days, we saw a Portuguese ship in the distance. We sailed toward it frantically, waving and shouting. The captain was a kind man who rescued us and listened to our story. He was sailing to Brazil and offered to take us with him. He even bought my boat for a fair price and freed Yuri, though I am ashamed to say I had considered selling the boy. The Portuguese captain showed me more kindness than I deserved, and I have never forgotten his mercy. When we reached Brazil, I saw a land of endless opportunity. The soil was rich and sugar plantations stretched across the countryside. I used the money from selling my boat to purchase a small piece of land and began growing tobacco. For 4 years, I worked as a planter, and my farm prospered. I was becoming successful and comfortable, exactly what my father had wanted for me. But still, I was not satisfied. My plantation in Brazil grew larger each year, and I should have been content. I had fertile land, good weather, and crops that sold for high prices. Other planters respected me, and I was making more money than I had ever imagined. But something inside me remained restless. Perhaps it was the memory of those profitable African trading voyages, or perhaps I simply had an adventurous spirit that could never be tamed. Several other plantation owners approached me one day with a proposal. They wanted to send a ship to Africa to trade for slaves to work on the Brazilian plantations. They knew I had been to Africa before and asked if I would captain the voyage. They promised I would not have to pay anything. I would simply need to manage the trading, and in return, I would receive slaves for my own plantation. I should have said no. My farm was doing well. I had everything I needed. But greed and foolishness clouded my judgment once again. I agreed to their plan. On the first day of September in the year 1659, exactly 8 years after I had first disobeyed my father and gone to sea, I set sail from Brazil on what I thought would be a profitable voyage. For 12 days the weather was fair and the sailing smooth. Then, far from any coast, a terrible hurricane struck our ship. The storm was unlike anything I had experienced before, even worse than that first storm when I was 19. The wind roared like 1,000 wild beasts, and waves taller than our masts crashed over the deck. The ship creaked and groaned, threatening to break apart at any moment. We struggled for days against the storm, all of us exhausted and terrified. Finally, in the dim light before dawn, a sailor shouted that he saw land ahead. But his words brought no relief. We were being driven straight toward rocks and a shoreline where the waves exploded with deadly force. Before we could change course, our ship struck something beneath the water with a sickening crunch. The impact threw men across the deck. Water began pouring into the ship through broken boards. We knew the vessel was doomed. Someone managed to launch a small boat, and we all climbed into it desperately. 12 of us crowded into that tiny boat while our ship settled deeper into the water behind us. We rowed frantically toward shore, but the waves were impossibly powerful. Each one lifted our small boat high into the air and then dropped us into deep valleys of water. The shore looked close but seemed impossible to reach. Then an enormous wave, bigger than all the others, rose behind us like a moving mountain. The wave lifted our boat vertically, as if a giant hand had grabbed us. For a moment, we hung suspended in the air. Then the wave flipped us over and smashed us down into the churning water. I felt myself tumbling through the sea, unable to tell which way was up or down. My lungs burned for air. I was certain I would drown. Somehow, another wave pushed me upward, and my head broke the surface. I gasped for air and looked around frantically. The shore was much closer now, but I could see none of my companions. The waves kept crashing over me, pushing me forward and pulling me back. Each time I thought I might reach the beach, the undertow dragged me toward deeper water again. I swam with every bit of strength I possessed. My arms and legs felt like lead weights, but I forced them to keep moving. Finally, between waves, I felt sand beneath my feet. I stumbled forward, fell, got up, and stumbled again. One more enormous wave hit me from behind and threw me onto the beach. I crawled away from the water on my hands and knees until I collapsed on dry sand, coughing and gasping. For a long time, I simply lay there, grateful to be alive. When I finally had enough strength to lift my head, I looked back at the sea. I could see our ship in the distance, stuck on rocks with waves breaking over it. I saw no sign of the small boat or any of my companions. I called out their names, but only the wind answered me. I was alone. As the reality of my situation settled over me, I began to feel the full weight of despair. I had no weapons, no tools, no food, no water. I was soaking wet, and night would soon fall. I did not know if this was an island or part of a mainland. I did not know if dangerous animals or hostile people lived here. I did not even know if I could find fresh water to drink. I walked along the beach searching for any sign of my shipmates, but found nothing except pieces of broken wood from our vessel. Eventually, I found a small freshwater spring trickling down some rocks, and I drank deeply, which revived my spirit slightly. As darkness approached, I looked for shelter and found a thick tree with branches low enough to climb. I pulled myself up into the tree and wedged myself into a fork between branches, hoping I would be safe from any creatures that might roam in the night. That night was one of the longest of my life. I was exhausted, but too frightened and uncomfortable to sleep properly. Every sound made me jerk awake. I shivered in my wet clothes and thought about my father's prophecy that I would regret not listening to his advice. How right he had been. I had pursued adventure and fortune, and now I was stranded on an unknown shore, possibly the only survivor of our doomed voyage. When morning finally came, I climbed down from the tree and returned to the beach. The storm had passed completely, and the sea was now calm and blue, as if mocking me with its peaceful beauty. I looked toward where our ship had wrecked and was surprised to see it was still there, no longer being pounded by waves. An idea formed in my mind. If I could somehow reach the ship, I might be able to salvage supplies that would help me survive. The ship sat about a mile from shore, stuck firmly on the rocks where the storm had driven it. The morning tide was low, and I could see that the vessel had not broken apart completely. If I could swim out to it, I might find tools, food, weapons, and other supplies that could mean the difference between life and death on this lonely shore. I walked along the beach until I found several large pieces of wood that had washed up from the wreck. With great effort, I lashed them together using some rope and vines to make a crude raft. It was not beautiful or well made, but I hoped it would float. I pushed it into the calm water and climbed aboard carefully. Using a broken plank as a paddle, I began the long journey toward the ship. The swim out took me nearly an hour. Several times my raft nearly tipped over, and I had to move very slowly to keep my balance. But finally, I reached the side of the ship. A rope still hung down from the deck, and I grabbed it and pulled myself up. When I climbed over the rail and stood on the tilted deck, I felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. This ship had been my prison, carrying me toward a voyage I should never have attempted. Now it might be my salvation. I explored the ship carefully. Water filled the lower decks, but the upper areas were still dry. In the captain's cabin, I found bread, rice, cheese, and dried meat, all still good. I also discovered several bottles of rum and fresh water in sealed casks. In the carpenter's storage area, I found tools, including hammers, saws, nails, and axes. I found muskets, pistols, gunpowder, and lead for making bullets. There were also ropes, canvas sails, and spare lumber. I could not carry everything at once, so I had to think carefully about what I needed most urgently. I loaded my small raft with biscuits, rice, cheese, dried goat meat, some carpenter's tools, muskets, gunpowder, and a large bag of nails. The raft sat very low in the water with all this weight, and I paddled back to shore with my heart pounding, terrified that a wave might swamp my overloaded craft. When I reached the beach safely, I pulled everything above the high tide line and sat down, exhausted but pleased. I had food, tools, and weapons. I was no longer completely helpless. After resting and eating some cheese and biscuits, I made a second trip to the ship before the tide came in. This time, I brought back more planks of wood, spare canvas, another musket, and more food supplies. Over the next 2 weeks, I made 12 trips to the wrecked ship. Each time, I brought back more useful items. I salvaged hammocks, blankets, clothes, paper, pens, ink, mathematical instruments, charts, and books. I found the ship's dog and 2 cats who were still alive and very happy to see another living creature. I even managed to construct a larger, sturdier raft that could carry heavier loads. On my final trip, I found a large grindstone for sharpening tools, several bags of nails and spikes, and a complete set of spare sails. As I loaded these items, I noticed the ship was settling deeper into the water. The wood was beginning to break apart from constant pounding by the waves. I realized this would likely be my last opportunity to salvage anything. That night, a storm came again. In the morning, when I looked out at the rocks, the ship had vanished completely. It had broken apart and sunk during the night. I felt strangely sad, as if I had lost an old friend, even though that ship had brought me to this desperate situation. But I was also grateful. I now had far more supplies than I could have hoped for when I first washed up on this shore. Now, I needed to think seriously about my situation and make plans for survival. I had no idea if this was an island or part of a continent. I did not know if other people lived here, whether friendly or dangerous. I needed to find a good location to build a shelter, somewhere safe from weather, animals, and any potential enemies. I spent several days exploring the area near where I had landed. I discovered that I was indeed on an island. I could walk around the entire coastline in a few days. The island had hills covered with trees, valleys with fresh grass, and several springs of clear water. I saw goats running wild in the hills and many different kinds of birds. The climate was tropical and warm, though I did not know exactly where in the world I might be. I guessed I was somewhere off the coast of South America, perhaps near the mouth of the Orinoco River. I chose a spot for my dwelling on the side of a hill, near a small cliff that would provide protection from sun and rain. A small plateau of flat ground sat in front of the cliff, and I decided to build my shelter there. I wanted to protect myself not just from weather, but from any wild animals or hostile people who might exist on the island. I designed my home to be like a fortress. First, I drove tall wooden stakes into the ground in a semicircle in front of the cliff, creating a strong fence with no gaps large enough for anything to squeeze through. I left no door or gate in this fence. Instead, I built a ladder that I could pull up after climbing over the top. This way, nothing could enter my home while I slept. Behind this fence, I used the cliff face as one wall and built a large tent using the ship's canvas. I stretched the canvas over a frame of wood and secured it firmly to create a waterproof roof. Inside this tent, I placed all my supplies, organizing everything carefully. I hung the hammock from the ship and made the space as comfortable as possible. Building this shelter took me many weeks of hard labor. Every day, I worked from sunrise until I was too exhausted to continue. I cut wood, drove stakes, carried rocks, and slowly improved my fortress. my hands developed thick calluses, and my arms grew stronger. The work kept me busy and prevented me from thinking too much about my loneliness. I also began keeping a journal. I had salvaged paper, pens, and ink from the ship, and I decided to record my experiences. I carved notches on a large wooden post to mark the passage of days, and I wrote down everything that happened to me. Writing helped me process my thoughts and feelings. It made me feel slightly less alone, as if I were talking to another person. As I wrote in my journal, I tried to think rationally about my situation. Yes, I was stranded alone on an uninhabited island with little hope of rescue, but I was alive when I easily could have drowned. I had managed to salvage an enormous amount of supplies from the ship. I had food, tools, and weapons. I had fresh water and a comfortable shelter. Many men in my situation would have had nothing at all. I made a list in my journal of the evil and good aspects of my condition. On the evil side, I was cast away on a horrible, desolate island with no hope of rescue. I was divided from all mankind and banished from human society. I had no clothes except what I wore, and these would soon fall apart. I had no defense against attacks by men or beasts. But on the good side, I was alive and not drowned like all my companions. I had been singled out and saved from death. I was on an island with no wild beasts to hurt me, unlike the coast of Africa. God had sent the ship close enough for me to get supplies. I had everything I needed to live comfortably and even everything I needed to be happy for the rest of my life. This exercise of comparing my miseries with my blessings helped me see my situation more clearly. I began to feel that perhaps God had saved me for a purpose. Perhaps I was meant to learn something important during my time on this island. I had spent my whole life chasing after adventure and wealth, ignoring my father's wisdom and God's guidance. Maybe this isolation was an opportunity to reflect on my mistakes and become a better person. After I completed my fortress and felt reasonably safe, I began to think about long-term survival. The supplies I had salvaged from the ship would not last forever. I needed to learn how to feed myself from the resources of the island. I needed to preserve the gunpowder carefully, because once it was gone, I would have no way to hunt. I needed to grow my own food. Among the supplies I had brought from the ship, I found several bags that had contained grain for feeding chickens. When I shook out these bags to use them for other purposes, some loose grains of barley and rice fell onto the ground near my dwelling. I thought nothing of it at the time. But a few weeks later, I noticed green stalks growing in that spot. To my amazement and joy, these stalks eventually produced heads of barley and rice. This discovery filled me with hope. If I could grow grain, I could make bread. I carefully harvested these stalks and saved every single seed. I planted them during what seemed to be the rainy season and watched them grow. It took me several years of experimentation to figure out the best times to plant and harvest and to grow enough grain to make a significant amount of bread. But eventually, I succeeded. I also learned to hunt the wild goats that lived in the rocky hills of the island. At first, I shot them with my musket, but I worried constantly about wasting gunpowder. Then I had a better idea. I built traps and caught several young goats alive. I fenced in a valley with strong barriers and created a pen where I could keep goats. Over time, I bred them and created my own flock. This meant I had fresh milk and meat whenever I needed it, without using any gunpowder at all. Learning to make bread proved extremely difficult. First, I had to harvest the grain and separate the seeds from the chaff. Then I needed to grind the grain into flour, which I did using stones since I had no mill. Next, I had to make dough by mixing the flour with water, but I had no oven for baking. After many failed experiments, I learned to make large clay pots, let them dry in the sun, and then bake them in a hot fire until they became hard. I used these pots for cooking and for storing grain and water. For baking bread, I eventually created a kind of oven by building a fire and letting it burn until I had a bed of hot coals. Then I would place my dough on a flat stone, cover it with a clay pot, and heap the hot coals around and on top of the pot. This method worked surprisingly well, and finally I could eat fresh bread again. I spent enormous amounts of time and effort on tasks that would have been simple in civilization. Making a simple wooden shelf might take me weeks because I had to cut down a tree, saw the wood into planks with a hand saw, and carefully join the pieces together. Everything required far more work than I had ever imagined. I also learned to make clothes from animal skins. My original clothes rotted away in the tropical climate within a few months. I killed goats for meat and saved their skins, which I learned to cure and soften. I made myself a crude coat, trousers, and a cap. I also made a large umbrella from goat skins, stretched over a frame of sticks. This umbrella protected me from both the hot sun and the frequent rain showers. I must have looked ridiculous in my homemade outfit, but I had no one to see me and laugh. Time passed slowly. I marked each day on my wooden post with a knife. 1 year became 2 years, then 3, then 4. I developed routines that filled my days and kept me from despair. Each morning, I would read from the Bible I had salvaged from the ship. Then I would hunt for food or work on improving my home. In the afternoons, I would work on projects like making pottery, weaving baskets, or tending my grain fields. In the evenings, I would write in my journal by candlelight. I explored every part of my island thoroughly. It was about 10 miles long and about 6 miles wide at its broadest point. I discovered a pleasant valley on the other side of the island where fruit trees grew abundantly. Grapes, melons, and citrus fruits all flourished there. I built a second, smaller shelter in this valley so I could spend time there during harvest season without having to walk back to my fortress each night. I learned to make raisins by drying grapes in the sun. I learned which plants were edible and which were poisonous. I discovered turtle eggs on the beaches and found they made excellent meals. I caught fish using lines and hooks I made from salvaged materials. Slowly, year by year, I became skilled at living off the land. But despite all these accomplishments, I remained deeply lonely. I talked to my dog and cats as if they were human companions. I talked to myself constantly, just to hear a human voice. Sometimes I would read passages from the Bible out loud, simply to practice speaking. I feared that if I went too many years without conversation, I might forget to talk altogether. I thought often about my past life and my many mistakes. I had disobeyed my father, who only wanted what was best for me. I had ignored wise advice and chased after wealth and adventure. I had been given many chances to change my ways, but each time I had chosen foolishly. Now I was paying the price for my stubbornness and pride. Yet I also felt that my time on the island was changing me in important ways. In my old life, I had rarely prayed or thought about God except when I was in danger. Now, alone with nothing but time to think, I read the Bible regularly and prayed every day. I began to feel grateful for my survival rather than bitter about my isolation. I started to see my situation not as a punishment, but as an opportunity to become a better person. I had been on the island for nearly 6 years when something happened that terrified me and changed everything. I was walking along the beach on the far side of the island when I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, pressed in the sand, was a human footprint. I stood frozen, staring at that footprint in the sand. It was clearly the print of a human foot, with 5 toes and a heel, and it was much larger than my own foot. Someone else was on my island, or at least had been here recently. For 6 years, I had believed I was completely alone. Now I knew that was not true. Terror seized my heart. Who had made this footprint? Was it a friend or an enemy? Were there many people or just one? Were they still on the island, perhaps watching me right now from the trees? I looked around frantically, expecting to see someone rushing toward me. But the beach was empty, except for birds and the endless sound of waves. I ran back toward my fortress as fast as I could, looking over my shoulder constantly. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every rustling leaf sounded like footsteps. When I finally reached my home, I pulled up my ladder and hid inside my fence, my heart pounding like a drum. For 3 days, I did not leave my fortress. I sat inside with my muskets loaded, prepared to defend myself, jumping at every sound. After 3 days, I began to feel foolish for being so frightened. Perhaps the footprint had been my own, though I could not remember walking on that particular beach. Perhaps it had been there for a long time and I had simply never noticed it before. I tried to convince myself there was a logical explanation that did not involve other people on my island. But I could not shake my fear. I began to worry that I had been too careless all these years. My fortress could be seen from certain angles. The smoke from my fire might be visible from far away. If there were other people on the island, they would certainly know about me by now. Why had they not approached me? Perhaps they were hostile and were waiting for the right moment to attack. I decided to make my home even more secure. I planted a second fence around my fortress, filling the space between the 2 fences with thick brush and small trees. Within a few years, this created an impenetrable wall of vegetation. No one looking at it would know that a dwelling lay hidden inside. I also dug a cave deeper into the hillside behind my home, creating a secret place where I could hide if enemies came. I became much more careful about everything I did. Instead of building large fires that created visible smoke, I learned to make a fire pit that burned hot but produced almost no smoke. I moved my goat pens to hidden valleys where they could not easily be seen. I stopped working in my grain fields during the middle of the day when I might be visible from a distance. For 2 years, I lived in constant fear and alertness. Then, one day, I found the courage to return to the beach where I had seen the footprint. I needed to know the truth. When I arrived at that stretch of sand, I discovered something far more horrible than I had imagined. The beach was scattered with human bones. Skulls, ribs, leg bones, and arm bones lay half buried in the sand. The remains of fires blackened several spots on the beach. Signs of a terrible feast were everywhere. I fell to my knees, sick to my stomach, understanding immediately what had happened here. Cannibals had come to this island, probably from a nearby land, and had killed and eaten their prisoners on this beach. I vomited into the sand and then stumbled away from that horrible place. For weeks afterward, I could not eat meat without thinking about what I had seen. I had nightmares about being captured and eaten by savages. I stayed in my fortress for months, too frightened to venture far from home. But gradually, my fear turned to anger. How could human beings do such terrible things to each other? How could they kill and eat their own kind? I decided that if these cannibals ever returned to my island, I would attack them and kill as many as I could. I would hide near the beach with my muskets loaded and punish them for their wickedness. I made detailed plans for this attack. I would wait until they were busy with their terrible feast, then rush out and shoot them. With my muskets, I could probably kill 6 or 7 before they even knew what was happening. The rest would flee in terror. I spent hours preparing my weapons and choosing my hiding spot. But then, one day, as I was reading my Bible, I began to question my plan. Who was I to judge these people and execute them? They had never done anything to harm me. Their customs, while horrifying to me, were the traditions they had been taught since childhood. They did not know any better. They thought they were doing what was right. By what authority could I appoint myself their judge and executioner? I remembered that I too was a sinner who had made many mistakes in my life. I had disobeyed my father, wasted opportunities, and lived selfishly for many years. If God judged me by my sins alone, I would deserve punishment as well. Yet God had shown me mercy and given me a chance to change. Should I not show mercy to others, even if their sins seemed worse than mine? I decided to leave the cannibals alone unless they directly threatened me. I would avoid the side of the island where they came. I would stay hidden and safe. I would not seek them out or provoke a confrontation. This decision brought me peace. I no longer felt consumed by thoughts of violence and revenge. More years passed quietly. I continued my daily routines, working to improve my life and keep myself busy. I made better furniture, wove stronger baskets, and improved my grain harvests each year. I had now been on the island for 15 years, and I had become so skilled at survival that I lived quite comfortably despite my isolation. Then, one morning, I woke to find smoke rising from the direction of the cannibal beach. They had returned. My heart raced as I loaded my muskets and climbed to a high point where I could see the beach through my telescope, which I had salvaged from the ship years ago. I counted 9 naked savages sitting around a fire. As I watched, they dragged 2 prisoners from a boat. My stomach turned as I realized what was about to happen. The cannibals killed one prisoner immediately and began preparing him for their feast. But the second prisoner suddenly broke free from his captors and ran directly toward my side of the island. 2 of the cannibals chased after him, while the others continued with their horrible meal. The prisoner was running for his life, and his pursuers were close behind. I watched this chase through my telescope, my mind racing. Should I help the prisoner? If I did, I would reveal my presence on the island and make enemies of the cannibals. But if I did nothing, an innocent man would be caught and killed. What was the right thing to do? The prisoner reached the edge of the forest and plunged into the trees. His 2 pursuers followed. They were now very close to my home. I could hear them crashing through the underbrush. In that moment, I made my decision. I grabbed my muskets and ran toward the sounds of the chase. I burst through the trees and found the prisoner collapsed on the ground, exhausted from running. His 2 pursuers stood over him, about to grab him. I raised my musket and fired. The sound exploded through the forest, and one of the cannibals fell dead instantly. The second cannibal froze in shock, having never heard a gunshot before. Before he could react, I dropped my first musket, grabbed my second one, and aimed at him. I did not need to shoot. The man turned and fled in terror, running back toward the beach. I let him go. I had killed one man today, which was enough. I felt sick about taking a human life, even to save another, but I knew I had made the right choice. The prisoner still lay on the ground, too frightened and exhausted to move. He looked up at me with eyes full of fear and wonder. I smiled at him and made friendly gestures to show I meant him no harm. Slowly he stood up and approached me cautiously. Then, to my surprise, he knelt down and placed my foot on his head, making signs to show he would be my servant forever. I helped him to his feet and gave him water from my flask, which he drank gratefully. He was a young man, perhaps in his mid-20s, with straight black hair, bright eyes, and handsome features. His skin was olive-colored, and he had a pleasant, intelligent face. I guessed he came from one of the tribes of mainland South America. I led him back toward the beach, keeping hidden in the trees. Through my telescope, I could see the cannibals loading their boat and preparing to leave. The man who had run away must have told them about the magical thunderstick that killed his companion. They were fleeing in fear. I watched until their boat disappeared over the horizon. Then I felt safe enough to relax slightly. My new companion tried to communicate with me through gestures. He pointed to the bodies of the cannibals and made signs asking if we should bury them. I agreed this was a good idea. We dragged the bodies far from my home and covered them with soil and stones. The whole time, the young man looked at me with gratitude and devotion in his eyes. I needed to call him something, so I named him Friday, because I had saved him on a Friday. I pointed to myself and said "Master" several times. then pointed to him and said, "Friday." He was quick to learn and soon understood his name. Over the following days and weeks, I began teaching him English words. Friday proved to be an excellent student and companion. He learned new words quickly and tried hard to please me. He was cheerful, honest, and hardworking. After so many years of complete loneliness, having another person to talk to felt like a precious gift. I no longer spent days without hearing a human voice. I had someone to share meals with, to work alongside, and to make plans with. I taught Friday many things. I showed him how to use tools and how to help with farming and hunting. I taught him about my Christian God and read to him from the Bible. At first, Friday had many questions that I found difficult to answer. He asked why God did not simply destroy the devil if God was all-powerful. He asked why God had not taught Friday's people about Christianity. These were hard questions, and I did my best to answer them honestly. Friday also taught me many things. He told me about his homeland on the mainland of South America. He described the tribes that lived there, their customs and wars. He explained that the cannibals came from a different nation that was at war with his people. He had been captured during a battle and was being taken to be eaten when I saved him. Most importantly, Friday told me that white men with beards like mine lived among the tribes of the mainland. He said a ship had been wrecked there many years ago, and the survivors lived with his people. This news stirred something deep inside me. If other Europeans lived on the mainland, perhaps there was a chance I could reach them and eventually find passage back to civilization. I questioned Friday carefully about the distance to the mainland and what kind of boat would be needed to reach it. He told me the journey could be made in a large canoe in just a few days if the weather was favorable. A wild hope began growing in my heart. Maybe I could escape this island after all. Maybe Friday and I could build a boat and sail to the mainland together. But first, I needed to help Friday adjust to his new life and make sure we could trust each other completely. I made him clothes from animal skins, which he found strange at first, but soon appreciated. I gave him his own sleeping area in my home and began teaching him how to shoot a musket. At first, the loud sound terrified him, but he learned to master his fear and became quite good at handling weapons. Friday especially loved eating goat meat and bread, which were much better than the food he had known in his homeland. He marveled at everything I had created on the island, examining my tools, my pottery, and my grain fields with wonder. He called me master with such genuine affection and loyalty that I began to think of him less as a servant and more as a true friend. One day, about 6 months after I had rescued him, Friday came to me with an excited expression. He had been watching the ocean from a high point and said he could see his home country in the distance. I climbed up to look and could indeed see land on the horizon when the weather was very clear. Friday pointed toward it with such longing in his eyes that I understood how much he missed his people and his homeland. That night, I made a decision. I would help Friday build a large canoe so we could sail to the mainland together. Perhaps his people would welcome me. Perhaps I could find those other white men he had mentioned. Perhaps I could finally find a way to return to England. After 18 years on this island, I dared to hope for rescue once again. We began working on the canoe immediately. We found a large tree and spent weeks cutting it down and hollowing it out. Friday knew how to make these canoes from his own culture, and he guided our work. We shaped the wood carefully, making it smooth and balanced. We carved paddles and made a sail from the canvas I had salvaged from the ship so many years ago. The work was hard but rewarding. Every day our boat took better shape. Every day my hope grew stronger. Friday sang songs from his homeland while we worked, and I found myself singing along even though I did not understand the words. We were building more than a boat. We were building a bridge between our two worlds, a vessel that would carry us toward freedom. It took us nearly 4 months to complete the canoe and prepare it for the journey to the mainland. We made it large enough to carry 20 men if necessary, and strong enough to handle rough seas. We dug a channel from where we built the boat down to the water so we could launch it properly. Finally, the day came when everything was ready. But before we could leave, something happened that changed all our plans. Friday and I were working near the shore when he suddenly grabbed my arm and pointed toward the ocean. A boat was approaching the island. My heart leaped with hope. Perhaps this was a ship coming to rescue me at last. But Friday's face showed only terror. He told me these were more cannibals coming for another feast. I counted the boat through my telescope and saw 21 savages, along with 3 prisoners they planned to kill and eat. This time the boat was heading toward my side of the island, much closer to my home than before. We had to act carefully or they would discover us. I made a quick decision. We would hide and watch them. If they left without discovering our home, we would let them go peacefully. But if they came toward our dwelling, or if I saw an opportunity to rescue the prisoners, we would attack. I had lived on this island for 18 years without fighting these cannibals, but now that I had Friday with me, and now that they had come so close to my home, I felt I must defend our territory. We armed ourselves with muskets, pistols, and swords. I taught Friday how to load and fire the guns properly, and he proved to be a quick learner and a brave companion. Together, we moved through the forest toward the beach, keeping hidden in the trees where we could watch without being seen. The cannibals dragged 3 prisoners from their boat. 2 of them had dark skin like Friday's people, but the 3rd man had white skin and wore the tattered remains of European clothes. My heart raced. This was one of the white men Friday had told me about, captured by the cannibals and about to be killed. I could not let that happen. The cannibals prepared their fire and began their terrible ritual. They killed one of the dark-skinned prisoners immediately, but before they could kill the others, I decided we had to act. I could not stand by and watch innocent men be murdered, especially when one of them was a fellow European. I whispered my plan to Friday. We would attack from 2 directions, shooting our muskets first to cause confusion and fear, then rushing forward with our other weapons. Friday nodded bravely, though I could see he was frightened. These were fierce warriors, and there were many of them, but we had surprise and superior weapons on our side. I gave the signal, and we both fired our muskets at the moment the explosions echoed across the beach. 3 cannibals fell dead instantly, and several others were wounded. The rest jumped up in confusion and terror, shouting and looking around frantically to see where the attack came from. Friday and I reloaded quickly and fired again. 2 more cannibals fell. Now the survivors were running toward their boat, desperate to escape from the island. But I ran from the trees shouting and fired my pistols at them. Friday charged forward as well, swinging his sword. The cannibals were completely terrified. They had never seen guns or white men before. To them, we must have seemed like supernatural demons. Most of the cannibals reached their boat and pushed off from shore, paddling frantically away from the island. But 3 of them ran into the forest in panic, going the wrong direction in their confusion. Friday chased after them, while I ran to free the prisoners who were still tied up on the beach. The European prisoner was weak, but alive. I cut his bonds and gave him water. He looked at me with tears streaming down his face and tried to speak, but could barely make sounds. He had been beaten and starved by his captors. I helped him sit up and gave him some bread from my bag, which he ate slowly. The other prisoner, one of Friday's people, was also badly treated, but in better condition. I cut his bonds as well and gave him water. He looked at me with amazement and gratitude. Then Friday returned from chasing the cannibals in the forest, and when he saw this prisoner, he let out a cry of joy and ran forward to embrace him. Friday was laughing and crying at the same time, speaking rapidly in his own language. He turned to me with a face full of happiness and said, "My father, my father." I realized with wonder that this prisoner was Friday's own father, captured by the enemy tribe and about to be killed when we rescued him. What an incredible piece of good fortune that we had saved Friday's father from such a terrible fate. Friday kissed his father and held him close, then kissed the ground where I stood, then ran back to embrace his father again. I had never seen someone so happy. It touched my heart deeply to witness this reunion. After all my years of loneliness, I understood how precious family connections were. We helped both rescued men back to my fortress, moving slowly because they were weak. The European man could barely walk, and Friday's father was also exhausted from his captivity. When we reached my home, I gave them food, water, and a place to rest. Then Friday and I returned to the beach to make sure no cannibals had returned. The beach was littered with bodies and blood. We dragged the dead away and buried them, then cleaned the area as best we could. We wanted no signs of the battle to remain if more cannibals came to investigate. We also destroyed the cannibals' boat so they could not return for it. That night we had a feast to celebrate the rescue. I had 4 people in my home for 18 years. Friday, his father, the rescued European man named Paolo, and myself. We ate roasted goat, bread, and raisins. Friday was so happy to have his father alive that he could hardly sit still. He kept getting up to check on him, bring him water, and make sure he was comfortable. Paolo told me his story over the following days as he regained his strength. He was Spanish and had been part of a ship that wrecked on the mainland coast 8 years ago. 17 men had survived the wreck and lived with the native tribes. They were treated reasonably well, but were not allowed to leave. The tribes kept them as valuable prisoners because of their knowledge of European tools and weapons. Paolo had been captured by the cannibal tribe during a raid and was being taken to be eaten when we saved him. He told me the other Spanish survivors would be overjoyed to escape the mainland if we could find a way to rescue them. This news excited me greatly. With 17 more Europeans, we would have enough men to build a real ship and sail back to civilization. I began making plans for a rescue mission to the mainland. But first, Paolo and Friday's father needed to fully recover their strength. We also needed to build up our supplies of food and weapons. I decided we would wait several months before attempting the dangerous journey. During this waiting period, I put everyone to work improving our settlement. We enlarged the living areas, built better furniture, expanded the grain fields, and increased our goat herds. With 4 people working together, we accomplished in weeks what would have taken me months to do alone. I felt like I was running a small colony rather than just surviving in isolation. Friday's father proved to be wise and helpful. He knew many skills that were new to me, including how to weave baskets in better ways and how to identify useful plants I had overlooked. Paolo taught us some Spanish words and told us stories about life in Spain. For the first time in 18 years, I felt like I was part of a community again. One evening, as we sat around the fire, Paolo asked me how long I had been on the island. When I told him it was 18 years, he looked at me with amazement and respect. He said I must have the patience of a saint to have survived so long alone without going mad. I told him that God had given me strength and keeping busy with work had saved my sanity. But now, with companions and a chance to escape, my patience was running out. I wanted desperately to return to England, to see if my family was still alive, to walk on city streets again, to be part of civilization. Every day of waiting felt like torture, yet I knew we had to be careful and well prepared. Rushing foolishly would only lead to disaster. The morning sun rose over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I stood on the deck of the ship, hardly able to believe this moment was real. For 18 years I had dreamed of seeing a sail on the horizon, of hearing English voices, of standing on a vessel that could carry me away from my lonely island. Now it had finally happened, and I felt overwhelmed with emotion. Captain Williams approached me and shook my hand firmly. He said he owed me his life and his ship. Without my help, he and his officers would have died on that island, and the mutineers would have sailed away as pirates to terrorize other vessels. He promised that when we reached England, he would tell everyone about my courage and cleverness. He also insisted that I take no passage money. I would sail as his honored guest, and he would provide everything I needed. I thanked him sincerely, though I told him I had only done what any decent man would do. I asked about our heading and when we might reach England. He explained that we were currently off the coast of South America, near the mouth of the Orinoco River, just as I had guessed all those years ago. The voyage to England would take approximately 2 months if the weather remained favorable. 2 months seemed like nothing compared to the 18 years I had already waited. Friday stood beside me at the rail, looking at the ship with wonder in his eyes. He had never seen such a large vessel before. Everything amazed him, from the tall masts to the complex system of ropes and sails. The sailors treated him with respect after hearing how bravely he had fought to help recapture the ship. Some of them tried to teach him sailor's knots and other skills, and Friday learned quickly, as always. I went below deck to the cabin that Captain Williams had given me. It was small but comfortable, with a real bed, a table, a chair, and a chest for storing belongings. After sleeping in my homemade fortress for so many years, this simple cabin seemed like a palace. I sat on the bed and felt the unfamiliar softness beneath me. I touched the smooth wood of the table and the iron nails holding the planks together. Everything felt strange and wonderful. That first day aboard ship, I could barely eat. My stomach felt nervous and unsettled, partly from the motion of the ship and partly from the overwhelming change in my circumstances. I kept expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream, that I was still alone on my island, building fires and tending goats. But it was real. I was truly sailing toward home. Paulo and Friday's father had also come aboard with us. Paulo was overjoyed to be leaving the region where he had been held captive for so long. He talked constantly about seeing Spain again and reuniting with his family if they still lived. Friday's father was quieter but seemed content. He told me through Friday that he was grateful to see his son happy and safe, and he was curious about the lands we would see during our journey. The mutineers who had surrendered were put to work as regular sailors. Captain Williams watched them carefully, but treated them fairly. He believed that most men would work honestly if given a chance to redeem themselves. However, the 5 men who had refused to surrender were kept in chains in the hold. They would face trial in England for mutiny and attempted piracy, serious crimes that usually resulted in hanging. Sometimes I felt sorry for these 5 men. I knew what it was like to make bad decisions and suffer terrible consequences. I had disobeyed my father, ignored wise advice, and spent 18 years paying the price. But I also knew that these men had chosen violence and rebellion. They had tried to steal a ship and abandon their captain to die. Justice required that they face punishment for their crimes. On the 3rd day at sea, Captain Williams asked me to join him in his cabin. He wanted to hear my full story. I told him everything, starting from the day I first went to sea against my father's wishes. I described my capture by pirates, my escape, my years as a planter in Brazil, and the terrible storm that shipwrecked me on the island. I told him about the years of loneliness, learning to survive, building my fortress, and growing my own food. When I described finding the footprint on the beach and later discovering the cannibals, Captain Williams listened with intense interest. He said he had heard stories of cannibal tribes in this region, but had never believed them until now. I told him about rescuing Friday and the deep friendship that had grown between us. I explained how finding companions after so many years alone had changed everything for me. Captain Williams asked what I planned to do when I reached England. I realized I had been so focused on simply getting home that I had not thought carefully about what would happen after. My parents were surely dead after so many years. My brothers and sisters might have moved away or forgotten about me. Everyone probably assumed I had died decades ago. I would be returning to a world where I was a ghost, a man who had vanished from life and suddenly reappeared. I also worried about practical matters. I had no money in England. My plantation in Brazil might still exist, but I had no way to claim it or receive any profits from it. I would arrive in England as poor as a beggar, despite my years of hard work. How would I support myself? What would I do with the rest of my life? But Captain Williams surprised me with good news. He said that before the mutiny, His ship had been sailing to England from Brazil, carrying goods for several planters. Among the cargo were chests belonging to planters who had asked him to deliver them to merchants in London. Captain Williams had records showing which chests belonged to which planters. If I could prove I had owned a plantation in Brazil, he might be able to help me recover some money. This conversation gave me hope. That evening, I searched through my belongings from the island. I had brought very little with me aboard ship, but I had carried one small chest containing papers and personal items I had saved from my original shipwreck. Among these papers, I found documents from when I had purchased my land in Brazil, contracts with other planters, and records of my crops and sales. These papers were old and damaged by moisture and time, but they were still readable. Captain Williams examined the papers carefully. He said they proved I indeed owned a plantation in Brazil. He also recognized the names of some of the other planters who had done business with me. If those men still lived, they might remember me and confirm my identity. This was better than I had dared to hope. I might not return to England as a beggar after all. The voyage continued smoothly. We sailed north along the coast of South America, then turned east to cross the Atlantic Ocean. The weather was mostly fair, with steady winds that pushed us toward home. I spent my days on deck, watching the sea and the sky, talking with Friday and the crew, and slowly adjusting to life among people again after so many years alone. Friday adapted to ship life remarkably well. He became a favorite among the sailors because of his cheerful nature and willingness to help with any task. He learned the names of different parts of the ship and could climb the rigging as well as any experienced sailor. Some of the sailors tried to teach him sailor's knots and other skills, and Friday learned quickly, as always. I went below deck to the cabin that Captain Williams had given me. It was small but comfortable, with a real bed, a table, a chair, and a chest for storing belongings. After sleeping in my homemade fortress for so many years, this simple cabin seemed like a palace. I sat on the bed and felt the unfamiliar softness beneath me. I touched the smooth wood of the table and the iron nails holding the planks together. Everything felt strange and wonderful. That first day aboard ship, I could barely eat. My stomach felt nervous and unsettled, partly from the motion of the ship and partly from the overwhelming change in my circumstances. I kept expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream, that I was still alone on my island, building fires and tending goats. But it was real. I was truly sailing toward home. Paulo and Friday's father had also come aboard with us. Paulo was overjoyed to be leaving the region where he had been held captive for so long. He talked constantly about seeing Spain again and reuniting with his family if they still lived. Friday's father was quieter but seemed content. He told me through Friday that he was grateful to see his son happy and safe, and he was curious about the lands we would see during our journey. The mutineers who had surrendered were put to work as regular sailors. Captain Williams watched them carefully, but treated them fairly. He believed that most men would work honestly if given a chance to redeem themselves. However, the 5 men who had refused to surrender were kept in chains in the hold. They would face trial in England for mutiny and attempted piracy, serious crimes that usually resulted in hanging. Sometimes I felt sorry for these 5 men. I knew what it was like to make bad decisions and suffer terrible consequences. I had disobeyed my father, ignored wise advice, and spent 18 years paying the price. But I also knew that these men had chosen violence and rebellion. They had tried to steal a ship and abandon their captain to die. Justice required that they... Living in London felt strange and difficult after so many years of isolation. Everything seemed too loud, too crowded, too fast. The streets were filled with carriages, horses, and thousands of people rushing in every direction. Buildings pressed close together, blocking out the sky. The air smelled of smoke and waste instead of clean ocean breezes and forest flowers. Sometimes I felt like I could not breathe, and I had to go to quiet places just to calm my racing heart. Friday struggled even more than I did. He had never seen a city before, never walked on paved streets, never entered a building with multiple floors. Everything frightened and confused him. The first time he saw a horse, he thought it was a monster. When carriages rolled past with wheels taller than a man, he believed they were magical. At night, the sight of thousands of candles and lanterns burning in windows amazed him. He asked me if English people were afraid of darkness and needed to chase it away with constant light. I rented a small house in a quieter part of London where we could live while waiting for news from Brazil. Captain Williams had sent urgent letters to my former neighbors and business partners, asking them to confirm my identity and provide information about my plantation. He had also contacted lawyers to help me establish my legal right to any property or profits that might remain after 18 years of absence. During these waiting weeks, I tried to reconnect with my old life. I searched for information about my family and learned that my father had died 10 years earlier and my mother shortly after him. Of my 2 brothers, one had been killed in a battle in France, and the other had disappeared years ago and was presumed dead. My sisters had married and moved away. I found one of them living in the countryside with her husband and children, and I wrote to her explaining that I was alive and had returned to England. My sister responded with a letter full of shock and joy. She had long ago given up hope of ever seeing me again. She invited me to visit her family, and I made the journey with Friday accompanying me. The reunion was emotional and bittersweet. My sister had been a young girl when I left, and now she was a middle-aged woman with grown children. We had lost so many years that could never be recovered, but she welcomed me warmly and made Friday feel like part of the family, which touched my heart deeply. While staying with my sister, I received a letter from Captain Williams. News had arrived from Brazil. Several of my former neighbors confirmed that I had indeed owned a plantation there. More importantly, one of my old partners, a kind Portuguese man who had helped me when I first arrived in Brazil, had been managing my plantation all these years. He had assumed I was dead, but had continued to maintain the property and save the profits in case any relatives ever came to claim them. This man, whose name was Rodrigo, had kept careful records of every harvest, every sale, and every expense for 18 years. He had acted with complete honesty, even though he could easily have stolen everything. Now he was preparing to send me a full accounting of what was owed to me, along with a significant sum of money that had accumulated over nearly 2 decades of profitable sugar harvests. Captain Williams estimated that I would receive approximately £800 per year for each of the 18 years, which totaled over £14,000. This was an enormous fortune, far more money than I had ever dreamed of possessing. I would be not just comfortable, but wealthy, able to live the rest of my life without financial worries. The irony struck me powerfully. I had spent 18 years living like a primitive man, wearing animal skins and growing my own food. Now I was returning to civilization as a rich man. But money meant less to me than it once had. My years on the island had taught me that happiness did not come from wealth or possessions. I had been alone with nothing but basic tools, yet I had found peace and purpose in my daily work. Now I had money and property, but what I truly valued were the friendships I had made and the wisdom I had gained through suffering. I decided to use my wealth to help others. First, I made sure that Friday, Paulo, and Friday's father were well provided for. I gave Paulo money to return to Spain and reunite with his family. I gave Friday's father money to return to his homeland if he wished, though he decided to stay in England with Friday for a while longer to see more of this strange new world. For Friday himself, I promised to always provide for his needs and treat him as a true companion rather than a servant. I also rewarded Captain Williams generously for saving me from the island and helping me recover my property. He had risked his life fighting against the mutineers, and he had spent considerable time and effort managing my business affairs. Without his help, I might not have ever recovered my Brazilian wealth. He tried to refuse my gift, saying he had only done his duty, but I insisted. A man who acts with honor and generosity deserves to be rewarded. The 5 mutineers who had refused to surrender were tried and found guilty of mutiny and attempted piracy. 3 of them were sentenced to hang, while 2 received long prison terms. I attended the trial and felt conflicting emotions. These men had committed serious crimes and deserved punishment, yet I also knew that all of us are capable of making terrible mistakes when we are desperate or afraid. I had made many foolish choices in my own life. By the grace of God, my mistakes had not led me to commit crimes as serious as theirs. After the trial, I visited the 2 men who had been sentenced to prison rather than hanging. I told them my story and explained that I understood how easy it was to make wrong choices. I offered to help their families while they served their sentences, providing money for food and housing so their wives and children would not starve. The men wept with gratitude and promised that when they were released, they would live honest lives. I hoped they would keep this promise. As the months passed, I slowly adjusted to life in England. The noise and crowds bothered me less. I learned to sleep in a real bed instead of a hammock. I wore proper English clothes instead of animal skins. I attended church services and relearned the rhythms of civilized life. But part of me always missed the island, the simplicity and peace of my life there, the sound of waves and the smell of forest air. Friday also gradually adapted to English life. He learned to speak English much more fluently. He studied reading and writing with determination. He learned about Christianity and asked to be baptized, which filled me with joy. He made friends among the other servants and workers we encountered, but like me, he sometimes seemed sad and homesick for the places he had known before. We talked often about his homeland and the family he had left behind. One day, Friday came to me with a request. He wanted to return to his country and help his people. He had learned so much in England about tools, farming, and building. He wanted to share this knowledge with his tribe. He also wanted to tell them about Christianity and give them a chance to hear about God. He asked me if I would help him make this journey and perhaps come with him. I thought carefully about his request. I had enough money to fund such an expedition. I was healthy and strong despite my age. But did I really want to return to that part of the world after finally escaping it? Did I want to risk my life again on dangerous voyages? I was now in my 50s, no longer a young man seeking adventure. I had a comfortable home, financial security, and peace. Why would I give that up? But as I looked at Friday's hopeful face, I realized I had to help him. He had saved my life on the island. He had been my companion and friend during the loneliest years of my existence. He had crossed the ocean to my world without hesitation. Now he was asking me to return with him to his world. How could I refuse? True friendship required sacrifice and loyalty. I began making plans for a voyage back to South America. This time, I would not be a desperate castaway, but a well-prepared traveler. I would bring proper supplies, hire a good ship and crew, and travel with clear purposes in mind. We would visit Friday's homeland, help his people, and perhaps even visit my old island to see how it looked after my years away. The thought of seeing that place again filled me with strange emotions, both painful and sweet. Captain Williams, hearing about my plans, offered to captain the ship himself. He said he owed me several more favors and would be honored to accompany us on this journey. Several of the sailors who had helped recapture his ship also volunteered to join the crew. They had heard stories about my island and wanted to see it for themselves. Paulo decided to join us as well. He wanted to return to the region and try to rescue the other Spanish survivors. After 2 months of preparation, we decided the time was right to attempt the journey to the mainland. We loaded our large canoe with food, water, weapons, and supplies. Paulo and Friday's father had fully recovered their strength. We had good weather and favorable winds. Everything seemed right for the voyage. But on the morning we planned to leave, Friday's father spotted something that made us change our plans immediately. He climbed to the high point where we watched the ocean and came running back with urgent news. A ship was approaching the island. Not a canoe filled with cannibals, but a real European ship with sails and masts. After 18 years of hoping and praying, a ship had finally come. My heart pounded with excitement and hope. This could be my rescue at last. But Friday's father warned me to be cautious. He said we should watch the ship carefully before revealing ourselves. Not all Europeans were good people. The ship might be carrying pirates or criminals. We needed to understand who these people were before making contact. We hid in the forest and watched through my telescope as the ship dropped anchor in a bay on the far side of the island. A small boat was lowered, and 11 men climbed into it and rowed toward shore. As they got closer, I could see that 3 of the men had their hands tied behind their backs like prisoners. The other 8 men were armed with swords and muskets. This was very strange. Why would a ship stop at an uninhabited island to bring prisoners ashore? I watched carefully as the boat landed on the beach. The 8 armed men dragged the 3 prisoners onto the sand and appeared to be arguing with them. The prisoners seemed to be begging and pleading, but the armed men ignored them. Then the armed men walked away from the prisoners and sat down in the shade of some trees about half a mile down the beach. They appeared to be eating and drinking, leaving the 3 prisoners tied up and alone in the hot sun. I realized with shock what was happening. These men were marooning the prisoners on my island, leaving them here to die just as I had been left 18 years ago. I felt anger rising in my chest. How cruel to abandon men on an island with no tools, no weapons, and no supplies. At least I had been shipwrecked by accident and had salvaged goods from my ship. These poor men were being deliberately abandoned by their own countrymen. I decided I had to help them, but I also saw an opportunity. If I could rescue these prisoners and win their loyalty, perhaps together we could capture the ship and escape the island. I told Friday to come with me while Paolo and Friday's father stayed hidden. We worked our way through the forest until we were close to where the 3 prisoners sat. They looked desperate and defeated. One of them appeared to be the captain of the ship, based on his better clothing and the way the others looked to him for guidance. I stepped out of the trees and walked toward them. When they saw me approaching with my musket and my strange clothes made of animal skins, their eyes went wide with shock. They probably thought I was a wild man or a ghost. I raised my hand in a peaceful gesture and spoke to them in English. I asked who they were and why they had been left on this island. The captain, for that is who he was, nearly wept with relief at hearing another English voice. He told me his story quickly. His name was Captain Williams. His crew had mutinied against him 3 days earlier, led by his first mate who wanted to steal the ship. The mutineers had decided to maroon the captain and 2 loyal officers on this island rather than kill them outright. The ship was now in the hands of criminals and rebels. I told Captain Williams that I would help him if he would agree to 2 conditions. First, that while he was on the island, he would obey my commands as if I were the admiral. Second, that if we succeeded in recovering his ship, he would give me and my companions free passage to England. The captain agreed immediately to both conditions. His 2 officers also swore their loyalty to me. I cut their bonds and gave them weapons from my supply. Now we were 6 armed men against 8 mutineers. The odds were not perfect, but they were better than before. I explained my plan. We would wait until the mutineers returned to check on their prisoners. When they discovered the prisoners were gone, they would search the island. We would ambush them and capture as many as possible. Everything happened exactly as I predicted. After several hours, the mutineers walked back along the beach to where they had left the prisoners. When they found the spot empty, they began shouting in confusion and alarm. They fired their muskets into the air as a signal to their ship. Then they split into groups to search the island. We let the group separate, then attacked the smaller group of 3 men. We surrounded them silently in the forest. Then I called out for them to surrender. They were so shocked to hear an English voice on what they thought was a deserted island that they dropped their weapons immediately. We tied them up and left Friday's father to guard them. The other 5 mutineers heard the commotion and came running. But when they arrived and saw their companions captured and 6 armed men waiting for them, they hesitated. I called out that their captain was alive and in command again. I said we would show them mercy if they surrendered peacefully, but we would shoot them if they resisted. 3 of them laid down their weapons immediately. The other 2 ran back toward the beach. We chased the 2 runners and caught them before they could reach their boat. Now we had captured all 8 mutineers, except for those who had remained on the ship. But that was a bigger problem. The ship still had about 26 men aboard, and they were loyal to the new mutineer captain. We could not simply row out and demand the ship back. We needed a better plan. Captain Williams told me that the men on the ship would eventually send another boat to find out what had happened to the first group. When they did not return, the ship's crew would become worried and investigate. We decided to prepare a trap for this second boat. We waited all through the afternoon and evening. Finally, as the sun was setting, we saw another boat being lowered from the ship. This one carried 10 men, even more than the first boat. They were heavily armed and looked ready for trouble. My heart sank. We might have successfully ambushed 8 unprepared men, but 10 armed and alert sailors would be much harder to defeat. The boat landed on the beach just as dark fell. The men climbed out cautiously, holding their weapons ready. They called out to their companions, but received no answer. They began walking toward the forest, staying close together for safety. I could see they were nervous and suspicious. I whispered to Captain Williams that we could not fight 10 armed men in a direct battle. We would lose. Instead, we needed to use deception and fear. I told him my plan, and he agreed it might work. We moved silently through the dark forest, positioning ourselves around the mutineers as they searched for their missing companions. When the mutineers were deep in the forest and spread out slightly, we began making strange noises from different directions. We called out the names of their captured companions in eerie voices. We fired single shots from different locations and then moved quickly before they could see where the shots came from. We made it seem like the island was full of armed men surrounding them. The mutineers became increasingly frightened. They fired their muskets randomly into the darkness, hitting nothing. They called out to each other nervously. Some of them wanted to return to the boat immediately, but their leader insisted they find their missing companions first. This disagreement caused them to argue among themselves, which made them even more disorganized. Finally, I put the finishing touch on our deception. I had Friday climb a tree near where the mutineers stood and call out in his own language, making wild and frightening sounds. Then Friday fired his musket and quickly climbed down. The mutineers were now convinced the island was inhabited by savage natives who had killed their companions. They broke and ran toward the beach in complete panic. We followed them silently, staying hidden. When they reached their boat, they jumped in and rowed frantically back to the ship. We watched from the trees as they climbed aboard and reported to their captain. Through my telescope, I could see the confusion and fear on the ship. The mutineer captain was gesturing angrily, clearly upset that both boats had failed to find the marooned prisoners. Captain Williams smiled grimly. He said the mutineers would now be afraid to send more men ashore. They might simply give up and sail away, leaving their original companions behind. But that would not help us capture the ship. We needed to draw them back to the island somehow and make them vulnerable. I asked the captain about the men still on the ship. Were they all loyal to the mutineers, or might some of them be convinced to switch sides? He thought for a moment and said that most of the crew had gone along with the mutiny out of fear, not because they truly supported it. If we could get aboard the ship and show strength, many of them might abandon the mutineers and join us. But how could we get aboard the ship? It sat anchored in the bay, about a mile from shore. Even if we used our canoe and the boats on the beach, we would be seen approaching long before we could reach the vessel. The mutineers would have time to prepare defenses and shoot us as we tried to climb aboard. We needed a different approach. I thought hard about the problem. Then an idea came to me. What if we used the prisoners we had captured? We could force them to row out to the ship and call for the ladder to be lowered, pretending everything was normal. Once the ladder was down, we could rush aboard before the mutineers realized what was happening. It was risky, but it might work. Captain Williams liked this plan. We selected the 3 prisoners who seemed most frightened and most likely to cooperate. I told them clearly that if they helped us capture the ship, I would speak for mercy on their behalf. But if they betrayed us or warned the mutineers, we would shoot them immediately. They agreed to help, desperate to save their own lives. We waited until the middle of the night, when most of the ship's crew would be sleeping. Then we put our plan into action. The 3 cooperative prisoners rowed one of the boats out to the ship, accompanied by Friday, Captain Williams, and me hiding under canvas in the bottom of the boat. The other prisoners stayed on the island under guard. As we approached the ship, one of the prisoners called up to the deck. A sleepy voice answered, asking what they wanted. The prisoners said they had found the missing captain and officers, all dead, killed by savages. They said they needed help bringing the bodies aboard. The voice told them to wait while he woke the others. This was the moment we had hoped for. As soon as the watch turned away to wake his companions, we threw off the canvas and quickly tied up the prisoners in the boat so they could not warn anyone. Then Captain Williams climbed up the side of the ship silently, followed by Friday and me, hiding under canvas. We reached the deck just as several sleepy sailors emerged from below. Captain Williams stepped forward into the light of the ship's lantern. The sailors froze in shock, seeing their captain, whom they thought had been abandoned on the island. Before they could react, more of our men climbed aboard. We had captured the deck, and most of the crew were still sleeping below. The mutineer captain and his closest supporters were sleeping in the main cabin. Captain Williams knew the ship well and led us straight there. We burst through the cabin door with our weapons drawn. The mutineer captain tried to grab a pistol, but Captain Williams struck him down with the butt of his musket. We tied up all the mutineer leaders before they could organize any resistance. Then Captain Williams stood at the top of the stairs leading below deck and called down to the crew. he announced that he had retaken his ship and offered a choice to every man. Those who had been forced to join the mutiny and now regretted it could join him and face no punishment. Those who insisted on remaining loyal to the mutineers would be treated as criminals. He gave them 5 minutes to decide. One by one, the sailors came up from below deck and knelt before Captain Williams, swearing loyalty and begging forgiveness. Only 5 men refused to surrender and had to be forced up at gunpoint. By dawn, the ship was completely under our control again. After 18 years on the island, I stood on the deck of a real ship, sailing under an English captain, heading toward home.